Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed. Does any other member wish to speak on the motion that is currently before the House? I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I listened with growing alarm to the speech of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition with respect to this motion which he has moved on the Standing Order 24-9E, and which he says is as a result of, has been brought because he believes that the privileges of this Honorable House have in some way been breached. Madam Speaker, he has read the motion at length, and the motion makes a number of allegations, and it states a number of things as fact, including that matters arising out of the discussion in Finance Committee with respect to the evidence given by some of the staff and the chairman of the Cayman Islands Airport Authority to Finance Committee on the 19th and 20th of this month have affected the privilege of this Legislative Assembly. But I note, Madam Speaker, that despite my urging yesterday, there is no particularity with respect to what the supposed breach is, or what privilege of this Legislative Assembly has in some way been offended by the evidence that was given. I can only conclude, Madam Speaker, that the omission of any detail or particularity in this respect is quite deliberate. And I can only conclude, as a result of that, Madam Speaker, that the deliberate omission is because the honourable member, the honourable leader of the opposition, well knows that there is no factual basis for the motion which he has brought. Madam Speaker, the motion recites a number of matters, and I want to take a little time to go through these and to ask all members of this Honourable House, on what basis does any of these constitute a breach of the privilege of this House? Madam Speaker, the first, whereas the Finance Committee of the Honourable Legislative Assembly heard evidence from the staff of the Cayman Islands Airport Authority and the chairman of the board on the matter of the investigation of the Information Technology Manager's suspension and reinstatement of the same officer and the retirement of the acting chief executive officer. Second, and whereas members of Finance Committee were repeatedly told on the 19th and 20th of June 2014 a letter of 4th December 2013 did not exist. Madam Speaker, I have read the Hansard's of the 19th of June, when this issue was raised 2 or 3 times, and I cannot find anywhere in it in which members of Finance Committee were repeatedly told on the 19th and 20th of June that a letter of 4th December 2013 did not exist. What I do find, Madam Speaker, is considerable confusion over the course of the evidence that was given by Mr. Andrew McLaughlin and by the chairman of the board, Mr. Kirkland Nixon, about which letter was being referred to, who it had been addressed to, and what the subject matter of the letter was. Madam Speaker, if I may refer you and members of the House to page 12 of the unedited Hansards of the 19th of June, 2014, which have previously been circulated to members. When the beginning of this discussion, when this discussion begun, and halfway down the page, the leader of the opposition questioned Mr. McLaughlin about a letter.
Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, the third paragraph, which begins, Mr. McLaughlin, there was a letter written by the authorities' legal team, that is Richard Connolly. There was a letter which you would have known about to the relevant, I suppose it means relevant to the suspended employee matter and board. What was termed in that letter as board interference, which says to them, Section 17, subsection 1 and Section 17, subsection 2 of the anti-corruption law, talked about it. It also specifically mentioned the name of the board and yourself in relation to your appointment as acting CEO. That letter was addressed to Mr. Nixon, board chairman, and to the then acting Mr. McCoy. I would like to get a copy of that letter. I would like this committee to get a copy of the correspondence provided, the letter written by Richard Connolly team, Arthur Edwin Gomez, the man that wrote the letter, the lawyer, and that I think can clear some of the doubts and give clarity on some of these things. You recall the letter, right? Mr. Andrew McLaughlin responded, I'm not familiar with that letter. The actual date is on my appointment letter, but I'm almost positive it was 1st December. And at that point, I called Richard Connolly at one of my, and the next remark is inaudible to the typist, to make sure they understood that they would only deal with the CEO of the CIA, Cayman Islands Airport Authority, at that time, which was myself. And then the Honorable Leader of the Opposition says there was an early letter, Mr. McLaughlin, and there was an FOI that requested that letter. And there was a letter back to you on correspondence saying, this is what the letter says from you. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, letter from me? The Honorable Leader of the Opposition says yes to Mr. Matthew Doris. Do you know who that is? Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says yes, Mr. Matthew Doris, the representative at Richard Connolly I was working with. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, and you wrote to him about the request. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, email or a letter, sir. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, in email, the same writing, whatever it was typed. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, okay. Then the Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, reading the email, please find below a very detailed and strange request for information from anonymous source and advice, unquote. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, no, that was about Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, I'm reading from the Hansard, ma'am, but I can't speculate.
Madam Chair, it's a mistake, and I think if he
Leader
refers it.
of the Opposition.
Yeah, I'm trying to clarify something here, because what is attributed in this unedited, remember this is unedited, Hansard that the Premier is reading, what is attributed to Mr. Andrew McLaughlin is actually my discussion with him.
All.
I can't say.
The first instant, can you just, sorry, sir, can you, I was trying to
On
listen
page,
to both
on
you at the
page
same time.
12.
Yes, I am on page 12, exactly where?
Where, yes. right on the right hand of the page, the last set of paragraphs on the bottom, where it begins, Mr. Andrew McLaughlin. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin said, okay, the Premier just read that. Then it went on to quote me, Leader of the Opposition, reading the email. Please find below where detailed and strange requests for information from a anonymous source unadvised. And they quote, they have Mr. Andrew McLaughlin in there, but that's a typographical error. Now, that was about the letter, and the lawyer wrote back to you. So, obviously, I'm talking to Mr. Andrew McLaughlin.
That is the correct position. I read it, but I do have a recollection as well. And it is unedited, so Madam Clerk, through this recording, please ensure that it's corrected, as sometimes members take a delay in making edits back to the clerk, and this is going to be an important record. So if, for the purposes of this proceeding where Mr. Andrew McLaughlin is, that action should be a continuation of Honorable W. McKeever Bush, Leader of Opposition. Thank you, members. Honorable Premier, thanks for your indulgence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has owned that what I'm about to read is actually his words. Now that was about that letter, and the lawyer wrote back to you, quote, Dear Andrew, quote, you wrote on the 25th and he wrote to you on the 26th. Quote, the request is extremely detailed and its focus is clear. It is apparent that the author of the request possesses detailed knowledge of issues relating to the employment of the IT manager and the documents that exist. The letter of the 4th of December 2013 was only sent in hard copy to the then acting, if that is what he was, and to the chairman. I have attached for your convenience the document containing the most relevant provisions of the Freedom of Information Law and the Freedom of Information Regulations. I have reviewed, because obviously the information officer was involved, Kieran's comments, and I would recommend a slightly different approach. I do not agree. I think that means that seeking to narrow the scope which she recommended of the request is an alternative to refusing the request on the basis of Section 9. That's what she said of the FOI. Unreasonable diversion of resources, that's what the information officer said. I think that is what she advised you. Regulation 10 of the FOI regs is clear that a public authority must invite consultation with a view to a narrower request before making a decision to refuse a request pursuant to Section 9C of the law. Unquote. Mr. McLaughlin, this letter and these, when I call letters, these emails are definitive proof, positive proof, that a letter exists and that you have knowledge of that letter and that letter was written to the chairman and to the then acting director. That's the Leader of the Opposition, Madam Speaker. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin replies, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would have to ask for whatever proof you are holding there that says I saw this letter, because I'm not familiar with the letter you're talking about. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, well, why? And he's interrupted by Mr. Andrew McLaughlin, who says, but I'm familiar with the email that I sent to Mr. Doris, and it was in relation to a Freedom of Information request. But I didn't say in that Freedom of Information request that specific letter. I was asking for advice on a large amount of information that was asked for or requested of my Freedom of Information, and then there's an inaudible word or words there at the time. There was an enormous amount of things going on, and we were running an airport running at 200% capacity at the time while we were trying to comply with Freedom of Information. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, we know all that, Mr. McLaughlin, I hear you. Mr. McLaughlin says a lot of these, and he's interrupted by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, says, but there's evidence you all had knowledge of things that you are saying that you do not have knowledge of. And I certainly don't appreciate that, because it says that you all had knowledge of the letter. The FOI says that. The one that you had, the one that your information officer had, the one that your lawyers advised you all on how to proceed with it. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin replies, yes, I'm sure it is someone in the CIA, meaning the Cayman Islands Airports Authority. 2 people received it, but I hope you're not saying that I personally had the letter in my possession. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, I'm not saying that you personally had. I'm saying you have knowledge of it, and that letter exists, and now I want a copy of it. And I think this committee, because it will clarify a lot of things. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, if the letter exists, sir, to the chairman, it will be provided. But we are, and the Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, I'm not going on an if. If you say it does not exist, you need to say that, bearing in mind what our standing orders say. You need to say this letter does not exist. You need to say that. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin replies, no, I can't say that. I cannot say that the letter does not exist. No, I can't say that. I cannot say the letter does not exist. But, Madam Speaker, if I may interrupt the reading of the Hansards, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has alleged and has stated as a fact in his motion that whereas members of Finance Committee were repeatedly told on the 19th and 20th of June 2014, a letter of 4th December 2013 did not exist. That is the main basis of his motion, and on which he claims that the privileges of this Honorable House have in some way been breached. He has said, not in his remarks with respect to this motion, but otherwise in this House in relation to this matter, that the committee, the Finance Committee of this House, has been lied to. Madam Speaker, to resume the narrative. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, I'm not saying the letter was written to you. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin replies, right. The Honourable McKeever, the Leader of the Opposition, I said who the letter was written to. I would like to get a copy of that letter, Mr. Chairman, because it would clarify a lot of things. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin replies, agreed. The Chairman says, Mr. McLaughlin, are you able to obtain a copy of the letter? What's the date of the letter, Mr. Bush? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says early January. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, but the letter was written in early January. Question mark. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says the letter from, and he pauses, how many letters you have from your lawyers in relation to this thing? Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, many went. He's interrupted by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition saying, well, the one that was written to the acting director at the time who was on leave or was put on leave and then let go, whatever was done, and the one that was to the chairman in regard to the matter. Mr. Chairman, the one that talks about section 17(1) and 2 of the anti-corruption law, the one that warned you all of it. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, Mr. Chairman, I am not in possession of the letter. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, Mr. Chairman, the board has to be. Therefore, the board should be able to get it from you as the authority's lead man at this point. Needs to be able to get that letter. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, right, sir, the CEO of the airport is away, off island, and his office is locked. And the Leader of the Opposition replies cynically, yeah, right. Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, anything that would have been in relation to this, the Freedom of Information Manager or the CEO would have possession of those documents. I do not have control of those documents at this time. The Chairman says, Mr. McLaughlin, we spent a lot of time on this particular matter. I don't like it any more than anyone else does, but at the end of the day, the member does have a right to request the letter. And Mr. Andrew McLaughlin says, yes, sir. The Chairman says, I realize that the CEO is on vacation. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition says, yeah, but somebody can get the letter. The Chairman says, but perhaps it is possible that someone does have a key to his office and someone does know the filing system. Mr. Nixon, meaning Mr. Kirtland Nixon, the Chairman of the board. Mr. Nixon says, Mr. Chairman, if it is the same letter that I am thinking about, I have a letter that I received from our lawyer advising us that statements were made about myself and the deputy by the acting chief executive officer, and he wanted us to be aware that the statement was made. It is a privileged letter, and he asked us to respond to it. but as far as I know, this letter is privileged between correspondence with our lawyers and ourselves, advising us that this was said. Now, Madam Speaker, I ask you and I ask the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, where in any of that has the House been repeatedly told that a letter of 4th December 2013 did not exist? All who have been questioned, the acting CEO and the board chair, have acknowledged the existence. Well, in the case of Mr. McLaughlin, he could not acknowledge the existence. He hadn't seen it. He says he could not say it did not exist. And Mr. Nixon says, if it is the same letter I am thinking about, I received it, it is privileged correspondence. On what basis does the Honorable Leader of the Opposition hang this allegation that Finance Committee was repeatedly lied to and told that a letter of 4th of December did not exist? Madam Speaker, for the sake of completeness, although what follows takes this neither further ahead or clarifies anything. We then get into the long discussion, debate, and controversy relating to the release or not of this privileged piece of correspondence. But I'll just wrap up this bit because for the sake of completeness. The chairman says, is the matter being litigated? Mr. Nixon says, if the matter is being, he's questioning, is it in the courts? The chairman says. Mr. Nixon says, no, 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 no. And then Mr. Bernie Bush says, Mr. Chairman, the lawyer maybe can't release it, but he can. He meaning the board chair, I presume. And then the Honorable Leader of the Opposition says, and I think, Mr. Chairman, that the letter will clear up a lot of things that we have been saying. And I have to agree with members that when something is not sub judice, that is the only time that this committee cannot be ruled out and say you can't have this. That is pertaining to all of this that we have been discussing since 4 o'clock or before. Now, Madam Speaker, I could take the time of this Honorable House and read the balance of this Hansard, which is another 3 pages, I think. 3.5 pages. But I don't think that is going to take this any further. We all know what transpired thereafter. The House, the Finance Committee adjourned or suspended, went in camera to discuss this matter. And I was not present, so I can't comment on what transpired in there, and I'm not going to simply try to repeat what has been told to me. But at the point where I re-entered the scene, the document, the letter, over which legal professional privilege had been asserted by the chairman, had been disclosed to members of Finance Committee on terms that it was kept confidential to them. I subsequently, Madam Speaker, had a discussion with the chairman of the board and with Mr. David Rich, his legal advisor, and Mr. Rich made it very plain to me that the position of his firm, who are advisors to the Cayman Islands Airports Authority, was that the letter had been disclosed on terms in breach of the legal professional privilege, that the chairman had no authority to disclose it, that the chairman's position was that he had been intimidated by members of the committee on charges of he would be in contempt of Parliament and that there were consequences which would follow if he did not turn the letter over. That he had made it clear to the chairman of Finance Committee that Mr. Nixon, as chairman, could only properly disclose the terms of that letter if he had the authority, the resolution of the board, that the legal professional privilege belonged not to the chairman, but to the board, and the board had not waived that privilege. And so, Madam Speaker, the letter which members have been circulated recently from Richard Connolly dated 20th of June, the same evening, is a letter by which the firm, on behalf of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority, reasserts the privilege with respect to the previous letter of 4th December on the basis that that is privileged correspondence between lawyer and client, and that the disclosure in the circumstances which occurred in the in-camera proceedings of Finance Committee was unlawful. Whether that is right or wrong is not something on which I am going to comment, although I have my own views and although I'm legally qualified. But that's not the argument that I am seeking to make. I'm not trying to argue one way or the other with respect to that. I'm trying to put on record what actually has transpired with respect to this matter. And I am asking the leader of the opposition, Madam Speaker, to explain to this Finance Committee how it is that he can say in his motion and assert as a fact that Finance Committee were repeatedly told that a letter of 4th December 2013 did not exist. And that, he says, is one of the principal bases for his motion asserting that the privileges of this honorable House or a committee of this House, Finance Committee, has in some way been breached. Now, Madam Speaker, having dealt with that, the motion Thank you for your guidance, Madam Speaker. Then, Madam Speaker, the motion goes on in the third clause. And whereas the chairman of the CIA finally produced the letter to members of Finance Committee which contain, I've dealt with that. I don't think I need to go into that. Right. The next one. And whereas members of Finance Committee were told that there was no board involvement with staff matters. And whereas documents show directives by the board relating to hiring, employee dismissals, and confirmation of acting roles. And whereas documentation show the deputy chair giving instructions to the board secretary to amend the existing organizational chart and add a chief financial officer above the financial controller and add a dotted reporting line from the SMS manager director to the board. And whereas the audit office was informed about the maladministration and interference by board of the operational matters with no audits being carried out as yet. And whereas the chairman of the board was given signing authority on bank accounts under the A classification of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority. And whereas the Airport Law 2005 revision, section 5, subsection 4, dictates the authority shall perform its functions through the chief executive officer. And whereas matters arising out of the discussion in the Finance Committee affects the privilege of this legislative assembly. Madam Speaker, I have struggled with this, but for the life of me, I cannot see what the six whereas clauses that I've just read, what they have to do with the price of eggs. What is the relevance of any of that to a motion which alleges that there has been a breach of the privileges of this House? What is it that the member, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, is alleging has been said or done that in some way affects the privileges of this House? Madam Speaker, I have been elected. November will be 14 years. And I've spoken to other members on my side who have been here, who will have been here at that point upward of 20 years, upward of 22 years. None of us can ever recall any matter being referred to the Committee on Privileges. This is a most serious matter. If this House votes in favor of this motion, the House will have concluded that a prima facie case has been made out that the privileges of the House have in some way been breached. And the House will then resolve itself into a Committee on Privileges to investigate this matter. I ask again, what privilege of Finance Committee has in some way been breached or violated by what transpired down here on the 19th and 20th with respect to the examination of witnesses on behalf of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority? Madam Speaker, it may well be that something was done that ought not to have been done, or something that ought to have been done was not done with respect to the investigation into what's called the porn matter and the employee there. It may well be that the employee should or should not have been fired. I don't know. And I'm not trying to make any comment one way or another with respect to that. It may well be that some other investigation ought to occur. Somebody else ought to look at this matter to see whether the management acted properly or not. But that, Madam Speaker, in my view, was not the proper function of Finance Committee and would not be a proper function of a Committee on Privileges with respect to this matter. For a Committee on Privileges to be invoked in the first place, there must be some breach or apparent breach of the privilege of the House. As I said, although the member has carefully avoided using any such language in his motion, I have understood based on his previous utterances that the allegation of the Leader of the Opposition is that Finance Committee was lied to. Now, if that is the case, Madam Speaker, I would expect to see the evidence in the Hansard report of the proceedings in Finance Committee. All of this extraneous evidence, if I may use that term loosely, that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition went through this morning and early afternoon when I stood up, Madam Speaker, to ask about relevance. All that may well be true. I don't know. I don't know where he got the documents from. I don't know if they're real. But that may well be the case. But what bearing does that have on the issue before the House? How is that relevant to a motion? And I'll try to fill in the blanks for him, which is essentially alleging that the Finance Committee of the House has been lied to by the three witnesses, Kirkland Nixon, Andrew McLaughlin, and Shane Bothwell, the three persons who gave evidence on behalf of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority. Where is the evidence that any of them have told any lie to the Finance Committee? Madam Speaker, I regret to say that I have had to form the view that the reason for this motion was actually given by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition at the start of his presentation this morning, when he went in to the history of what happened to the previous board which was appointed under his administration, and how the combination of FOI requests and Auditor General investigations and subsequent investigations under the anti-corruption law occurred. And I've had to come to the view myself, Madam Speaker, and of course I may be mistaken, that this motion has much more to do with retribution than actually dealing with any breach of the privilege of this House. If this is what happened to my board, look what I'm going to make happen to the new board. Madam Speaker, I believe the Honorable Leader of Opposition must know how very close we came to the Cayman Islands Airports Authority and the Cayman Island, the Owen Roberts Airport and the other airports being shut down as a result of what was transpiring up there. When we took office, this thing was at crisis stage. Madam Speaker, we have appointed to this board persons whom I believe can only be described not just as model citizens of this country, but persons who have given a lifetime of service in one respect or another. The chairman is Kirkland Nixon. The deputy chairman is Tom Guyton. We have a relatively young man, Joel Jefferson, Nathaniel Tibbetts, Strand Borden, the chief officer in the Ministry for Tourism, Bruce Smith, the deputy chief immigration officer, Vanessa Godfrey Banks, and John Magoo. That is the board of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority. Madam Speaker, you know, it is one thing for those like myself and the others sitting in this House who have volunteered for this role as public officers, to take the beatings that we take day in, day out, to be criticized and castigated and accused of all sorts of things and all manner of evil. One could probably even say that the civil servants themselves know what was in store when they signed up for the job. But, Madam Speaker, it is not only unfair, but it is counterproductive for us, because we want to pursue our own selfish ends, to castigate and malign persons who volunteer to take up responsibility, real responsibility, like the persons who are members of our statutory authority boards and government company boards and the various boards that serve the Cayman Islands. Because in our system of government, business of government could not function if we did not have these responsible, hardworking persons volunteer their time, resources, and abilities. And if this is what we are going to continue to do, undeservedly, to volunteers, bring them down here, castigate them, treat them like they are some sort of criminals, who's going to volunteer to do these jobs? Do we really believe that we're going to have to get to a point where any witness who is not an employee of government who comes down here to give evidence is going to have to come with a lawyer? That's where we're getting to. And then, not content with having subjected the witnesses to the kind of criticism and insults that were hurled at them and questioning, we wind up now with a motion which alleges implicitly, if not explicitly, that they've lied to Finance Committee, and the House should resolve itself into a committee on privileges so that we can examine them, finish castigate them, assassinate their characters, and send them off so we bring in the next set of board members. Madam Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has been here 30 plus years. He ought to know that the consequence of what he's doing is this. But Madam Speaker, he rambled on for quite some time with irrelevances this morning when he presented the motion. I call on him in his winding up to present the evidence to this House that the Finance Committee was lied to by any member of the Civil Aviation Authority, to Airports Authority, to use, as I did, the unedited Hansards of this House, not his faulty recollection, not put it into his own words, not use vague and far-reaching statements and remarks, but be particular about what the lie is that has been told, what is the privilege of this House that has been breached, that we are being called on as the Parliament of the Cayman Islands to constitute ourselves into a committee on privileges to try Kirkland Nixon, to try Shane Bothwell, and to try Andrew McLaughlin for having lied to Finance Committee.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Final call. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the mover if he wishes to exercise a right of reply.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Premier obviously was exercising or trying to exercise the absence of his skills as a lawyer. You see, Madam Speaker, not even in the dumbest of courts could he get away with what he just did there. Not even in a kangaroo court could that member get away with what he attempted. To come here to castigate me as his usual ploy, and to castigate anything that had anything to do with the former government, and believe that he could take a piece of this Hansard, pay no attention to all the evidence that I produced that says that what they told us in Finance Committee was not true. Pay no attention to that, and then read one little piece of a whole 2 days' work to let us try and believe and convince his members out there that we were here only to denigrate, to castigate, and to put down people like Kirkland Nixon. Who does he think he's talking to? Members, Madam Speaker, can do what they want with this motion. I struggled with what I heard, what I knew, and over the weekend I thought it necessary to bring this motion here because there was so much evidence about what we were told in Finance Committee that I had to get to a point where that evidence, not in this debate because it can't be done here, not in the Finance Committee because it couldn't be done there, but where we sit down, we examine evidence, paper, documents, and we call witnesses, and we ask them, and they talk to us. That's what the Privilege Committee is all about. It's not a committee where you coming down here to crucify people. Yes, Madam Speaker, I have been here 30 years, and I have tried in those 30 years not to point to the outside world who's not in here. Opposite of what the Premier has always been doing when he chooses to do so. When he wants to destroy anybody, when he wants to open up anybody's life, that's what he does, as he done some time ago with students. But when it comes to people that he's surrounded by, then it is wrong. And mind you, nobody's speaking disrespectfully of them, other than they choose to accept an appointment to a government board, a government entity, which we are responsible for. That does not hang out there all by itself while it has a law that it operates under. This central government, this legislative assembly, has a responsibility. Why do people blame us? Why do we go and get involved in these things if we don't have some responsibility? Only to somebody to come here, Madam Speaker, to tell us what they want to tell us? I've been here 30 years, like he says, and my job is to question. And as he did all the years that he's been here on this side, what was he doing? He wasn't questioning, I guess. You see, again, it is all good when you are killing somebody, as he just tried to do with the last board, to say it was in crisis. Why doesn't he say, Madam Speaker, that the crisis, yes, I agree, but it existed from before we took over, and that board was attempting to clean it up, but perhaps people like him, Madam Speaker, got involved on the sideline with their hush puppies, walking around, seeing what mischief they can create to stop that board from getting anything done. And so, yeah, maybe. But, Madam Speaker, can anybody, in this thing about castigating the chairman, can anyone tell me, and they can vote with this however they choose, can anyone say the chairman is a former civil servant of well over 35 years, I believe, head of an important department, who had been to Finance Committee year in and year out to defend his budgets over those many years. And he well knows the procedure in Finance Committee. Don't say he don't know. He's been here for well 35 years, head of a department, coming down here, I've been here, and answering questions, know what the process is, know what the procedure is. So he wasn't blind, dumb, and deaf. And can anyone believe that anybody here could intimidate Kirkland Nixon? Nah. You talking foolishness, Bobo. You think that because you are the premier, he thinks that, Madam Speaker, and because he has some law degree, if that he was defending somebody to get hung, they would got hung. Because the evidence is plain and all. Everyone out there, Madam Speaker, I don't know how they're going to vote, but Madam Speaker, everyone over there sat in these committees, and they heard the questioning, and they heard the answer. Why did he choose to only talk about the letter? This letter now that we're supposed to be frightened about. Look, Madam Speaker, I said earlier that we asked, we demanded, if that letter existed, we want to see. The chairman could have said, the letter exists, but I cannot show it to you. That's what he could have said. And so if any privilege existed, he would have protected it, but he chose not to do that. He chose to bring it. Because they thought I had one. They thought I had a letter. And so he was doing right. He was trying not to lie in that sense. So he brought it down. And the letter revealed much that we suspected, and now, Madam Speaker, the only people that can really clear the air on that are those people who the letter speaks to. And the only how we can do that, we can't bring them in this assembly. We didn't bring them in the Finance Committee. The only how these matters can be cleared up, Madam Speaker, is to bring those persons to the Privilege Committee. Madam Speaker, he says there's confusion. Well, then if it is confusion, he tried to do a good job in creating more confusion. Madam Speaker, I certainly don't need to wonder why the Premier kept asking members on Friday what they wanted done about the situation. I don't need to wonder now about that. I thought about it a lot. Because he has constantly gone to great lengths, as he's done just now, to stop anything from happening. While he say that's what he would like to see something done. You know, it's that story I keep repeating about the Brer Rabbit and the tar baby. Don't throw me in the briar patch. Don't throw me in the briar patch. Where he went? That's what he wanted. I think the Premier has been quite disingenuous, to state the least, as he has found excuses to try and block my effort to sending this matter to the Privileges Committee, the only place that we can call Mr. Kenneth McCoy. We can call them, and we can call other staff who has knowledge about what the situation is. And we can ask them all about their suspension, all about how they happen to be retired. But that is what the Premier don't want to happen. He don't want those things to get out, because the fact is it would be proof positive that there was interference, as I read to you. You don't know? He said he don't have manufactured. Yeah, look at these. You think it's manufactured? You would like to create that doubt, Mr. Premier, but you're not that smart. There, the honorable members of this House can really look at the evidence. And so he is misleading, to say the least, because he chose very conveniently to read, as I say, piece of our Hansard. Why didn't he read this part, Madam Speaker? Why didn't he read the other parts of the 19th of June, where Mr. Nixon took the stand, gave his name, and he went on to say, and Madam Speaker, that is on one page that I have here, because there's several pieces, but that's on probably one of the first pieces on 19th of June. The first page, and that's page 19th of June. And here what he says. The first time he sat down, before Mr. Nixon sat down and said, I want to tell you all something. The board never had anything to do with any of this. Before he sat down, before any question was even asked. That's what he said. Come on. Don't tell me you were all sleeping. Come on. You know what he said. But this is part I want to read what he said. He said, therefore, matters dealing with staff, but let me read the whole paragraph. Kirkland Nixon, given his name. And I would like to state for the record that in taking up the chairmanship at the airport, the board decided that we would follow the good governance model that is being proposed by government. Therefore, matters dealing with staff or any operational matter is the management decision unless the manager brings it before the board. So what I decided to do is to ask the people who dealt with the matter specifically to tell you exactly what happened as far as they can, and can give a full disclosure if necessary on this matter so we can get past it. Here is the key thing to this. Because the board had nothing to do with it. The letter says that Mr. Shane Bothwell, Madam Speaker, said that he had instructions. And when you read what Mr. Nixon says, he says, because you have to read all that he says. You just can't read piece of it. If he had been before a judge, he would have disbarred him. He would have disbarred him, Madam Speaker, for coming and telling half-cocked stories and expect to hold up the court. Madam Speaker, Mr. Nixon says that his associates instructed him about what to do with the investigation. Who are these associates? The government?
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, could you please point me to that last statement you made, sir?
Madam Speaker, I got so much evidence here. That's what I would like to get into, because I don't think we can do it all here. We can't. That's why I didn't want to do it here. I wanted to deal with it in the committee, not here. But after listening and figuring that's what he was going to do, there are some spots that needs to be pointed out. And as I said, Madam Speaker, that's only one aspect of what we were told. Mr. Bartwell himself Mr. Nixon on page 9 of the same Hansard, page 9 said, Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, I would like to say again, the board did not deal with this matter. We do not deliberately get into staff matters. When I read emails here, Madam Speaker, earlier, that showed that that's what they were doing. The board was specifically dealing with staff matters. And again, Madam Speaker, members must remember, I shouldn't have to take the time this afternoon to go through the fact that we were not only dealing with the letter, but we were dealing with several other issues. The porn matter, which was a complete confusion when you read what they said. Read what they said. The first of all, Madam Speaker, let me deal a little bit with it, because I think we need to deal with it, where Mr. Sheen said, Mr. Bothwell said, that another company had put on the porn. Although they had an investigative company, they had an investigative company that they paid, whom they say they trusted. They gave that evidence here, Madam Speaker. You might have been here that day. And he said that someone could have put that on there. Only 2 people. Further than that, Madam Speaker, the government itself should want to do something about it, because another staff member was being accused and fingers pointed at him. Lucky for him, he was off the island. And the only 2 of them had the password. Lucky for him, he was off the island. So you all want to sit over there and not send it to the committee. You all want to sit out there while somebody else, while you all know you was told that. And you know by now what had happened. So that man must be besmirched. Why? He not part of what? You know, Madam Speaker, too much of that going on. Here's a questioning, Madam Speaker, on page 5. And you felt that it was proven that the porn was visited by one of the 2 people, and the only one other person who had it was off on vacation. We had already proven that. So he could not be there at that time. As I said, documents say otherwise. Mr. Sheen Bartlett, yes, well, there's another piece of evidence that points towards the actual material in question may have been put on the computer. One of you over there, at least one of you, knows about the computer very well. Knows about that kind of IT. You know that couldn't be done. You know that. Don't look behind. There's only one person out there, Madam Speaker, I'm speaking to. He knows what I'm saying. Yes. Madam Speaker, can we, as a House, sit here listening to the Premier, because he is the Premier, and they are all in the same party, not understand, not want to agree. Here is it. Here is this evidence, Madam Speaker. From Mr. Nixon to Mr. Kenneth McCoy. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Cayman Islands Airports Authority, please be advised that until further notice and subject to the selection and confirmation of a CEO for CIA, there will be an immediate implementation of the following directive. There will be a suspension on all hires, confirmation of acting roles, pay increases, and employee dismissals at the CIAA unless otherwise approved by the board. And he say, what's wrong with it? Read what the airport law say. The airport law says that these are all, and the Auditor General says that these are all operational matters, and that the board cannot deal with it. Because they said they wasn't doing it. That's where the breach of privilege is in this house. When I asked them about the staffing matters, they said, no, we don't deal with staffing matters. That's not true. We don't deal with that, Mr. Nixon said. And on he went about that, Madam Speaker. That's one piece. Here's another piece. That was from the, here's another piece. That was a directive toward Mr. Kenneth McCoy. Sarge, print this, lay it at the table, and give it to all of them, Madam Speaker.
I take that as a request for it to be laid on table, request granted.
Please do so, Madam Speaker. Here's another one. From Tom Guyton to the Secretary of the Board. I'll give you another one. I would like to propose an immediate organizational chart revision for consideration at the next board meeting. Take the existing organizational chart and add a CFO position above the FC. Add a Chief Financial Officer position above the Financial Controller. Also, do a dotted reporting line from the SMS manager directly to the board. Now, that's not interference. I hope you all are listening. That's not interference. Who does that man supposed to be reporting to? Not to the management. And that's why Mr. McCoy had to write the other letter that said all these things are happening and I don't know anything about it. And that is why they let him go, Madam Speaker. That is why they let him go. That's why they don't want this privilege committee, because that will show all of you what they did was wrong and how they got rid of him. Look at all the other things. I read them already, Madam Speaker. I'm not going to take the time because I got other matters that I need to raise. The evidence is here. No evidence. I might not got a law degree, but I got good common sense. And you know what? The Premier can't fool me. He might get votes against me, but he can't fool McKeever Bush. Madam Speaker, I would like to lay this on the table, both of these. And since that other one was not, I don't know whether it was clear that I wanted that laid, give it to them quick so that they can have it before they vote. Look at what that one said, Madam Speaker. That was from the acting chief executive officer, from Mr. Kenneth McCoy. What does he say? I would like to question the protocol of some of the activities which I have observed where consultations and actions specific to CIA administrative matters have been taken by board members without my knowledge or inclusion, or in some cases I have been notified after the fact or have been later informed by managers involved. What does that tell you? What does that say? I would like to lay that on the table and give it to members. And Madam Speaker, The fact that someone is a signatory who is an appointed chairman but has nothing to do according to the law, according to the airport law, which says the authority shall perform, the authority, meaning the board, shall perform its functions through the chief executive officer. You can't get out of this. The governor told me that. He told me that when I was a minister. Only if you want to build something, and then you got to go through the governor. And I better change that. You got to go through him to get anything done. But only through the chief executive officer. But they didn't want to go through the chief executive officer. They wanted him gone. And so they took that opportunity to do that. And that's why they don't want to be brought here in the privilege committee, because we would have to call him and he could clarify, he could point out, he could give the evidence that all of that happened. What is good for the goose if it was bad for the last board, which he says, the premier says was bad, then it ought to be bad for this board, which is under him. But that's his problem, you see. He come from that side of the street that believes never done anything wrong. He come from there for 30 years and more, out fighting it. Beside the street, the one that they should flog you a long time on. I got friends, but sometimes it's so-called friends. And let's not get into, Madam Speaker, about who's a better person. Because I tell you what, could weigh him several times and he would be found wanting. Enough oil and curd. Make her go buy some. Madam Speaker, this said letter, which they have said, and that they demanded that we don't do anything about. They said, they brought it here, Madam Speaker. This legislature is privileged. You can bring down immunities law, but we didn't bring this down here, Madam Speaker. We didn't. Sarge, another one. Madam Speaker, you see, the letter that they complained about they were under some duress. I don't know who could have put Kirkland Nixon under any duress. None about it in this house. I know Mr. Nixon as good as anybody else in this house. He's not somebody that anybody intimidates easily. But he didn't know that we asked for whether they had a letter. He could have said, yes, we have it. But he chose to bring it. He chose to bring it. This letter, Madam Speaker, should go on the table of the House. That's where this letter should go, because we keep talking about, and the Premier talks about it, Madam Speaker. Everybody talks about it. We mustn't have it, but it's out there already. How they get it, I don't know. The radio station had it. But I don't think that this is privileged once it was brought and delivered to us. If there is a problem, and I know the Premier tried to lay it at my feet, he would like to do that. He would like to do that. Blame everything on me. This letter was about the disciplinary action. And if they says that this letter was a possible complaint, then shouldn't we want the person that asked their legal team to write the letter to the chairman, to the board. Shouldn't we want them then to not come and explain? How is the government, according to the premier, he wants to take some action. Yeah, you get outside this door without putting that in committee, and you'll never hear any more about it. So, the public ought to have this. And this must be laid on the table, Madam Speaker. That's what I'm going to do. I would like to hear why I can't lay this on the table. The premier is saying, no, you can't lay this. The public needs to hear about this.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, if it's your intention to lay it on the table, I'd like to take a 5-minute suspension to confer with the Principal Legal Advisor, the Honorable Attorney General, and come back in. I would appreciate if members would stay in their seat. It shouldn't take long to get the advice.